Welcome, everybody, to the final installment of our Tuesday night education series for the 25-26 season. Just a quick housekeeping note. Um, whoops. This webinar is being recorded. So if you're here, that is you consenting to be part of this recorded session. Your name and likeness won't show up unless you ask a question at the end of the session, and I'll just use first names for folks who do that. Um, let's go ahead and jump in. So, if folks have questions throughout the evening, you can ask them in the chat or Q&A, and I will moderate those questions to Angela as the evening goes on, and we'll let her finish up her talk before we start asking questions. Just want to do one more quick piece of housekeeping before I introduce Angela. First, I just really want to thank folks for joining us for tonight's webinar. Many of you have probably been hearing and reading about a series of really tragic avalanche accidents over the last couple weeks, including this really historic accident at Castle Peak in the Lake Tahoe area. You may have heard that three of the folks that were killed in that avalanche were ARI instructors, so we are really grieving along with the rest of the mountain community over these huge losses. We are also more grateful than ever to be able to offer free avalanche education to the public. We know it's not easy to show up for things like this, particularly when times are challenging. So we're really grateful to see you here today, making time to further your own avalanche education. So thanks for being here and looking forward to sharing some important info with you. Um, with that, I'm going to switch to a lighter note. I am really honored to be able to introduce Angela Hawse. Angela is one of the few female IFMGA mountain guides with a career spanning over 3 decades. So this means that Angela is internationally certified to mountain guide in multiple disciplines. She's the president of the American Mountain Guides Association, and for the past 20 years, she has trained and examined other aspiring guides. She's led more than 30 high altitude mountaineering expeditions to the world's greater ranges and has guided remote trips all over the globe from the Antarctic Peninsula to the Arctic. She's also a Black Diamond athlete and a member of the Protect Our Winters Alliance and the vice president of the IFMGA Technical Commission. And because there's nothing she can't do, she also has a master's degree in international mountain conservation. She instructs professional avalanche courses for the last 8 seasons. And I'm really excited to have her here to talk about something that maybe doesn't get as much attention as we'd like, which is avalanche safety and rescue for climbers. So, really honored to have you here, Angela. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera so we save some bandwidth, and I'll spotlight Angela for everybody, and then she's going to take it away with her slides. So, thanks so much, Angela. We're really excited you're here.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks everyone for showing up. I know these are extremely busy times, and I appreciate the honor of being here to represent Black Diamond and also me as a professional. Um, I had opportunity to do one of these last year, which was really great, and I've watched quite a few of these, and they're all great. There's a ton of information out there, so we're grateful to be participating in your Tuesday night educational series. Um, the only reason I have a lot of those credentials is because I've been around a long time. And for someone who lives in a continental snowpack and has ice climbed for 30 years, there's a lot to be said for that. And a lot of that is just diligence and good common sense and following best practices. But a lot of it is, it's also luck. You know, we work in terrain that's dangerous, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's a lot of uncertainty, and as someone who's backcountry ice climbed for a long time, I will be the first to admit there's a lot of times I've gone into the backcountry without carrying avalanche safety equipment, and sometimes those decisions have been very deliberate, and other times they haven't, and it's just kind of a cultural norm to not carry avalanche safety equipment. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit tonight. And feel free to use the chat, like Emma said, and throw any questions in there. Maybe even introduce yourself and where you're um, chiming in from, and we'll get this thing started. Okay, so Ice climbs, backcountry ice climbs are inherently in avalanche terrain. Now, certainly not all of them, but the majority of ice climbs in the backcountry in the US and Canada are in or below avalanche terrain. And it's something that, yeah, it's just inherent. That's where we find a lot of spindrift. This is a remarkable video of this guy who's actually soloing the Ribbon, which is not too far from where I live here outside of Ouray, Colorado. And this is amazing footage that he got with some fancy helmet cam or something. But what's remarkable is that he has the strength and wherewithal to hold on here. I think this lasts like a minute and a half. And it's that he captured it on film is incredible. If he would have had a partner and would have had avalanche safety equipment and a rope, there's a possibility his partner could have been knocked off his feet. There's a possibility the rope with the pressure of the snowfall, the spindrift, could have pulled him down, tugged him. So who's to say that it wasn't in this circumstance better for him to be solo? But this is a common occurrence on this particular climb. And people accept that risk all the time without going into it or even approaching the avalanche terrain. Spindrift is a common term used by alpinists. It's an alpinist terminology for loose snow avalanche. And it seems to be widely accepted as part of the sufferfest of being an alpinist is to just accept that spindrift is part of the program. But it really is, it's a loose snow avalanche. And inherently, most large multi-pitch, even some small single pitch climbs in the mountains are inherently in avalanche terrain because they're where the snow melts down these runnels or gullies and forms ice. And the snow melt thaw is what produces these beautiful ribbons of ice that we love to climb. But a lot of these climbs, they're not straight up, and the ice that forms that's vertical, the snow sheds off of it readily. But when you have benched climbs, there's a lot of climbs in the Canadian Rockies that have like what you might call pull drop if you're a kayaker. You would have like a steep pitch and then you would walk back or have a low angle slab section where you'd get to the next pitch. And these can be real sleepers for ice climbers, and a lot of people have been caught off guard. As you can see, a small avalanche here. This person, fortunately, is following, but if that would have happened to the leader, it could have easily pulled them off their feet, and they probably would have had all that distance to go without any protection. So some of these small pockets can produce big consequences. And a lot of times in avalanche terrain, the actual climb might not be exposed to significant avalanche terrain overhead, but the approach to a lot of these climbs are the concern and the descents, which often are overlooked. And these are some sobering statistics. Climbers are the third largest user group of fatalities in the US. In the last 26 years, this data has been collected, 194 deaths by ice climbers. It doesn't say ice climbers, that probably includes some alpinists, but the majority of it is winter backcountry climbing, which is sobering. And to further compound the cultural norms, a lot of the guidebooks don't really advise on using avalanche safety equipment. It's kind of astounding. I looked through a lot of these and couldn't find anyone that recommended carrying transceiver shovel probe. They're alluding to the fact that these climbs have hazard, like this one. This is, I think, mountain project or something. Just pick very stable snow conditions for this one. Like not much information at all. And then with the gear, they don't mention avalanche rescue equipment, but they consider hand warmers. Like it just is. It's kind of hard to believe that that's the case, because how many of you would go into the backcountry to ski without your partners or you carrying avalanche safety equipment. I wouldn't. I've turned around at trailheads because my partner forgot their transceiver before. I wouldn't go into glaciated terrain if I didn't have crevasse rescue gear and a team that knew how to use it. So it's just, it's something that's been entrenched over our culture for a long time because ice climbing has been around for a long time and it's been slow to evolve. Like, I mean, even skiers didn't use backcountry skiers generally in the war when they had skis on their feet. They didn't have avalanche transceivers at the start of the 20th century. They used avalanche cord, which they tied around their waist. It's like 25 meters of cord, what they would tie it around their waist in the hopes that the cords get afloat to the top and it's bright red so someone can find them when they're buried by an avalanche. And that was their mitigation strategy. And I assume they carried shovels. But I still remember when I first showed up backcountry skiing in 1983 on Red Mountain Pass, seeing someone with an avalanche cord tied to their ski. And I couldn't for the life of me understand what it was all about until I learned that avalanche cords were a thing. The first transceivers weren't even on the scene until 1968. This is the original Skady avalanche rescue beacon, which was actually called a beacon back then. And it kind of changed the culture of backcountry skiing. And ever since then, since the 1980s, in backcountry skiing, carrying transceivers and knowing how to use them and practicing with them has been common. The snowmobile sled industry didn't really get on the bandwagon until 2000. I mean, they were really late to the game, and there were a ton of fatalities with sled riding. Um, and they've, as you've all seen, a lot of almost all of them in avalanche terrain are carrying shovel, beacon, transceiver, and often airbags, and are taking courses. And so that's modernized a lot, but there's still in the backcountry ice climbing culture. This is Polar Circus up in Canada. Is There's just a long established tradition of entrenchment where we're not carrying avalanche safety equipment, and that really needs to change, as we can see based on the numbers, and just that, it's easily avoidable. The tools a lot of us as backcountry skiers use for mitigating hazard is the use of terrain. We look at maps. A lot of times we have an avalanche forecast that can tell us on what aspects and slope angles we might find avalanche problems. But a lot of times, if ice climbers haven't taken a backcountry um, avalanche course, they're not really that skilled at looking at terrain when you impose avalanche problems on certain features with certain slope angles and certain exposures. And it's late to the game in education, and it's very, very complex. This is sun angles, this particular slope. This red line is the climb Stairway to Heaven in Eureka near Silverton, Colorado. And as you can see, it doesn't have, it's got a small bowl up here, which could certainly produce significant amount of volume of snow to knock someone off their feet on the climb. But this path over here to the north of it threatens the approach significantly. And the approach comes in from this road, and then it drops down into this ravine, and then it cuts across and comes back. And I would venture to say 65, 75% of the backcountry ice climbers climbing in Eureka are not using avalanche safety equipment. So some of the challenges for ice climbers or excuses for not carrying avalanche safety gear and not really having the savvy with avalanche hazard is a lot of times we approach these long climbs in the dark, so you can't really see much around and what the overhead hazard is. You can't necessarily see if the start zones are getting loaded. Oftentimes you can't even see them. And you can't even get to the start zones to do any direct observations like we're accustomed to when we're ski touring and we dig pits or we're probing and we're just checking for instabilities with small little tests on the go. And early season, I mean, ice climb, we can be ice climbing here in late October through November. And a lot of times the Colorado Avalanche Information Center hasn't even issued a avalanche bulletin at those dates. So a lot of times ice climbers fall out of the habit of even looking at that early season when it's available. There is significantly increased time of exposure to the hazard because unlike when we're ski touring, we generally try to avoid the avalanche hazard or mitigate it by moving through it quickly or having a strategy to exit. Whereas when we're ice climbing, it's not very fast and we are in the track or the run out the entire time. And oftentimes we descend that same route. So we have all kinds of things can go on throughout the day with increased temperatures, increased winds, and things that in our little microcosm of being on the route we might not be aware of overhead that's impacting the hazard. And then certainly this factors in is previous ascents lead to a confirmation bias that it's actually safe. That yeah, well they didn't report any avalanche hazard or they look like they got along fine, so I'm sure we'll be fine too. And certainly these are things that we talk a lot about in our avalanche education, and we need to get more avalanche education specific for ice climbers, which starting to see a lot of that, which is great. And in Canada, they've been running ice climbing specific avalanche education programs for a long time. The body of work that's going on in Canada is really impressive. A couple of guides, Sarah Hunican and Grant Statham, have developed an ice climbing atlas in conjunction with Avalanche Canada. So they're actually partnering with the Avalanche organization to get the word out how to treat ice climbs specifically due to the hazard that they impose that's different to other types of ski touring or sled riding. And this has been well received. I'm sure it's contributing to much greater safety in the zone, and it's a developing resource that they're continuing to build on with surveys and finding out how many people have had incidents on these climbs, all kinds of things, and it's really quite impressive. If you've never seen it, be sure to go and check it out. And they're using the avalanche terrain exposure scale that is general, but they've adapted it to waterfall ice climbing, which is really helpful because it really helps us look at all the different terrain factors, the exposure to the hazard, the time of year, all the different things that contribute to giving it a simple, challenging, complex, or extreme scale on the rating, which helps with decision making when you don't have a lot of information to go on. So, the eight scale is an emerging program that is just a great addition to all the other tools that we have at our disposal for assessing avalanche risk and making decisions in avalanche terrain. And I encourage you to go back, if you haven't, and watch this presentation on the eight scale by OnX that was, I believe it was like 11 or 12 months ago. And it's a great tool and resource. We won't dive into that too much here. Here is another example of one of the climbs in the atlas on the Canadian Avalanche site. And it's real detailed, you know, it shows where the approach is, where the walk-off is, where rappels are, and then it outlines the avalanche start zone. And you can see the actual ice climb is right below that. It's like a big giant funnel. And this, because it is very large and has a large start zone, they've rated it a 8.3 on the avalanche danger scale and or avalanche terrain exposure scale. This is another one. Again, a lot of detail. You can see they've even outlined where sloughs might occur, sloughs, loose snow avalanches, spindrift, whatever like this. And they have given this a simple scale. And you can see it is relatively, the approach isn't an avalanche path. It's got a simple walk off that avoids it. It tells you to belay in a cave, and it's got some really good information here. And there's a lot more on this atlas. These are just little snippets from this. And this is Polar Circus, probably one of the most famous ice climbs in Canada. It's a lot of exposure because you're on it all day, and a lot of avalanche hazard from above, on the sides, at the transitions, on the rappel, everything. So it's a really extreme endeavor that is definitely the climbers are benefiting from having this knowledge of the ice climbing atlas. And there's a group in the US that has started a similar project, although they're not associated with an avalanche forecasting center, but it's a small nonprofit and they're trying to do the same thing. I encourage you to check out their site. Obviously, funding is crucial for them to carry on their work, but they're developing an atlas that's also based on the basic 8 scale that they have adapted, like the Canadians, specific to waterfall ice climbing. So be sure and check out their site when you get time, and consider spreading the word that this is out there. I think that's another thing because they're not associated with an avalanche information center that they really don't have a lot of communication out there yet. And so, why don't ice climbers carry avalanche safety gear? There's a number of excuses or reasons. The additional weight and bulk certainly does hinder climbing movement, but it doesn't mean that you can't like haul a pack or have the second carry the gear. There's definitely strategies that you can get around this, but that again is going to slow you down possibly and increase your exposure time. The rope can be used to find anyone that's buried, which is I think that's been a common excuse for many, many years. And yes, like the avalanche cord, it could help you find someone that's buried, but how quick that would be compared to finding someone with a transceiver is going to be extremely slow. And if you don't have a shovel, it probably isn't going to be that effective anyway. And ropes can sever. It's very rare, but they can. There's no avalanche hazard exposure on the route. And, maybe they accept the risk of avalanche exposure on the approach as a reason. Uh, over, Overlook the overhead hazard, the approach, and the descent exposure. I think this is very, very common and one where a lot of people have been caught off guard. And then, as I said earlier, I think the cultural entrenchment is this is the way that we've done things forever. And so that's the way we're accustomed to. I don't think that there's a huge resistance to carrying avalanche safety equipment. I think it's just, it hasn't shifted. The mindset hasn't shifted like it did with the snowmobile community. And hopefully it's not going to take a number of more deaths before that attitude starts to change. So some of the potential things that you could do, you could carry the avalanche safety equipment just to the base if there's no threat directly on the climb or natural avalanche is unlikely. You could carry it on the route if the route has avalanche terrain or if descent travels through avalanche terrain, or don't carry it at all if no avalanche terrain on, around, or above the approach or descent exists, which is kind of the de facto how we roll. And since the advent of skimo, avalanche safety equipment has gotten extremely light, and there's really very few excuses to not carry avalanche rescue equipment when it's become smaller, it's become lighter and more packable. This is one of the new PEEPS IPS transceivers that's smaller than a chocolate bar. And it's super light, and there's no reason not to carry that. And the avalanche hazard extends into the alpine. And in the alpine, we climb ice in the summer season. A lot of times, there's a lot of big north faces you can do up in Canada that oftentimes will have avalanche hazard, as you can see here, huge slab concerns. And these routes are commonly done, in a season where it's not winter, so we're not thinking avalanche hazard, and thus we're not often carrying avalanche safety equipment. And the perception, again, it's an entrenchment, and we need in our culture to learn how to adapt to the conditions on our feet and plan accordingly. And if I'm leaving for a summer climbing trip now that is an alpine trip, I'm going to pack my transceiver shovel probe and have that in my car if I need it. But I think a lot of times people aren't even thinking like that, and thus we haven't shifted to that possibility yet. With all the fatalities and accidents that have happened on ice climbs, the Canadian Avalanche Association and the AMGA have both put out statements to promote the use of avalanche safety gear for waterfall ice climbing as well as for summer mountaineering when avalanche hazard may be present. And these are on their websites. And I think after so many years, they just felt responsible for sharing information that improved public safety. And the AMGA's statement was consider using companion rescue equipment and match that with the appropriate level of avalanche rescue training. And the unfortunate thing also with not carrying and wearing a transceiver is in the event that there is a burial, you're exposing the members of the rescue party uh, to harm, to further danger that's unnecessary because they're probably having to pull out probes and get dogs on the scene, and it just doesn't contribute to the overall safety of the entire backcountry ecosystem. And so spread the word out there. That's all I've got. It's something that we all need to have tough conversations with our colleagues and friends and partners that are ice climbing and in the industry as well. And yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to participate and love to have any questions or comments. Emma, you still there?
Still with you. Yeah, I don't see any questions in the Q&A or the chat yet, but folks, feel free to drop those in. Um, while we're waiting to see if folks drop some stuff in the chat, Angela, you had given us a little bit of an overview of kind of the history of the modern transceiver. And I know this isn't exactly what the topic of your talk, but I think it's always good to clarify. A question we get a lot is, am I supposed to say transceiver or beacon? And why aren't they interchangeable? Can you maybe talk a little bit about why we use transceiver now?
Yes, and I really have to. You probably saw me stall a few times when I said
Oh, me too.
transceiver.
I still have to think about it.
Exactly. Well, a beacon is like a personal beacon locator, a PBL, where it emits a signal, but it doesn't receive. So that's why we're trying to get away from using beacon as a term for what our tool is, because it's not a beacon. It both transmits a signal, but it also can receive a signal, which is what a transceiver does.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's come up quite a bit in some of the news coverage of these accidents recently, is this idea of a beacon and what's the difference between that and like a PLB. So thanks for
My
clarifying.
first transceiver was an Ortovox F1 that had a little earbud, and it didn't have a screen, and it was all analog, and it was incredible. I mean, you could, because we were well trained in it, it was easy to use. And with that, I prefer transceivers that have the analog function because I know how to use them. But I think it's fairly foreign to the newer generation that haven't used that before. There's
Yeah.
probably a couple generations in there. It's not just the newer generation.
Whatever makes it easier for folks, right? We always tell students
Mhm.
like the best transceiver for you is the one you practice with. So
Exactly.
as long as you're out there using it. Um,
Exactly.
we have a question that just came into the chat. Sarah asks, often I find it difficult to see what's above an ice climb. Can you share more about your approach to assessing the above hazard while you're in the field?
Yeah. There's not a lot you can do from below. So finding vantage points where you might be able to look at old archival photographs. I mean, you can certainly look at any of the mapping programs online, like Caltopo is a great way to go. OnX, there's a lot out there, and they have Sentinel Weekly imagery, which you can actually. It's not like always super clear, depends on where you are, but sometimes you can see the snow where it's sitting and that'll give you an indication. But you're still not going to get a great idea. The best way to do it is look for representative slopes and then search on the Avalanche site that might have weather stations and that include the amount of precipitation, that show the wind that's impacting those similar elevations and aspects that are above the climb. Archival footage helps a lot, understanding the prevailing wind directions, looking back over like a 7 to 14 day period of like what the wind has done, how much snow transport there have been. Even say if I don't have any information above a climb I want to do, I'm going to choose the nearest weather observation station that has precip, and then I'm going to add that. I'm going to look at that on top of the wind transport that I've had and the wind direction over time. And then also temperatures, because that comes into play. If I had any above freezing temperatures or if conditions been pretty locked up with cold temperatures. So those are some of the strategies. Google Earth is great for flying around. Satellite imagery is only so the resolution's only so good. You can get a little bit out of that, but I haven't found the best solution for that question aside from those particular topics.
So I'm hearing a lot of like doing some homework. It's more homework before you head out into the field. Very little you can do once you're in the field.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Okay, here we've got a couple more questions. Let's see. Luke wonders if you can talk a little bit about some of the typical avalanche problems we see in summer mountaineering, those kind of like summer warm weather season avalanche problems. How do those look different and how do you manage them differently?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And a lot of times it's wet avalanche problems. So a lot of times we'll have a storm that dumps a bunch of snow, and in the summertime the sun's much higher in the sky, the temperatures are warmer, so that consolidates into a slab much faster if you have like, a significant dump of snow. And for a couple of days, it's likely that you're going to have a shed with high temperatures. So it's loose. I mean, it's wet, loose, and wet slab avalanches are most common in the summer. Early season, you might even have glide cracks up in the Pacific Northwest. Those are particularly common. Right away after a storm, if it's cold, you'll have dry loose, and you could have wet loose, and you could not wet loose, but you could have a slab avalanche as well in cold conditions. So it's super dependent on the temperatures, sun aspect, and how fast things heat up. So there's a lot of things like that, and sometimes that all has to be superimposed on the terrain. So it's anytime that you're getting into slopes above 35 degrees, you're gambling with avalanche hazard. And anytime you've had summertime snow on top of a snowpack, on top of like ice or a glacier that is in the that's more in the ablation zone, not up in the above the firn line where you have permanent snow. You're going to have some shedding periods that are going to happen in the first 24 to 48 hours if the temperatures stay warm.
Thanks. That's a lot of information to
Ooh.
like to process in the field. So again, I think for folks who are just maybe learning about avalanche safety and terrain management, it really is a lot of thinking about what the problems are and what's above you, right? I mean, I think it matters more whether the conditions are conducive to any kind of avalanche. I think if we're talking about managing different avalanche problems, there's so little you can do, like you said, Angela, once you're out in the field. And so again, that like doing your homework beforehand and understanding what the current avalanche problems are and knowing that there probably isn't going to be a regular forecast in the at the time that you're doing those summer mountaineering objectives. So that requires even you have a little more uncertainty, and so giving yourself giving things a wider berth, I think, is probably smart when we get to those summer problems.
Yeah, and a lot of times in the summer we're out for multiple days, where you may have had like a really good look at what's happened before you went in, and you've looked at an extended weather forecast before you leave, but you might not have cell coverage. You might not have the ability to get a weather forecast in some places. That's become increasingly rare. But I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't like 20, 25 years ago, we didn't have all this amazing technology at our fingertips with like forecasts and cell coverage and mapping apps and avalanche forecasts that are super sophisticated and problem solving, decision making matrices to figure this all out, or the education even. And it can always come back to just being conservative and thinking on your feet and really paying attention, which is what we want to do all the time when we're in outside in the mountains and especially in avalanche terrain, is just being very attuned to what the current weather's doing on the snow that's laying in the terrain and avoiding any areas of uncertainty unless you have really wide margins for error. And usually we don't have wide margins in this type of terrain. So the tighter our margins, the more we have to reel in our conservative decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Okay, Jeff wonders if you have any idea of the breakdown of climber fatalities between ice climbers and mountaineers or mountain hikers, like folks in Colorado who hike 14ers in the winter. And so I just to help illustrate, I just brought up that graph, the most recent version from the CAIC. And Angela, correct me if you have a different understanding of this, but my understanding has always been that the CAIC, in collecting these avalanche data, is classifies climbers as folks who are roped and
Yep,
folks who are unroped as hikers. So
that's correct.
obviously, there's glaciated climbing, but not in Colorado, and so that's my understanding of how they classify these. That's your
That's
understanding as well?
that's absolutely spot on. And this is for the entire US. And
Yep.
if you go to the CAIC Information Center and you go to, I think the tab's called accidents, you can pull up a ton of data there. Yeah, look at all these different graphs that you can pull up, and you can toggle the search menu to specific dates or specific user groups, and there's a lot there. I'm sure other Avalanche information centers have a lot of this data as well. Um, so I think if you spend a little time, you'll be able to narrow it down into your specific questions there.
Yeah, let me I'll just drop this link into the chat in case folks are interested in exploring that a little bit more. Um, okay, thanks, Angela.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. John wonders if you're finding that rangers and park staff are becoming more aware of ice climbers in their parks, or helping to promote using avalanche safety gear, or if this is still an area where you could use some help educating like park staff and rangers and those types of folks.
Yeah, I think that that's still an emerging body of work that needs to be pushed forward. And I think a lot of these rangers and park staff are actively involved in avalanche education if they're working in a winter snowpack, and that's probably a requirement of their job or their credentials to even to get a job. So I would say that that is improving. But I think even our education is a bit slow to the program. I mean, there's a lot less ice climbers climbing in the backcountry than there are backcountry skiers. But still, there's a significant number that we haven't in avalanche education, and it's certainly not just ARI, but all the providers haven't really addressed the problem to bring it more to the forefront. So I think that that's our responsibility, but I also think culturally it's our responsibility to question and ask the rangers and like ask the staff, do you have avalanche training? Do you have safety gear? Do you carry it in the summer? I mean, what's your guys' protocol? And at least start the conversation because that always like invites people to be curious and think more about it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I've just put the Avi Aware link into the chat here. So be sure and check that out. I see we have Amy is on the board of Climb Avi Aware, which is great. Keep up the great work out there. Appreciate all that.
Awesome. Thanks. I just dropped that into the chat with the attendees. Thanks, Angela. We've got somebody else who wonders, they mentioned on glacial objectives, we rope up to protect from crevasse hazards, and they wonder if you've ever opted not to rope up, Angela, due to an overhead avalanche hazard.
So I could run faster or like in
I
what
do.
way?
I wonder what the thinking is there. I think yeah, I'm curious. Maybe you could just walk us through a little bit of your thinking when you are on glaciated terrain, like when you choose to rope up and how that is dependent on the terrain around you.
That's a really, really good question. And my default is over the past 15 years is rope up. That's like my number one go-to. Always rope up. If it's a very low snow year, the particular time of year, I can see all the hazards. I can see the crevasses because everything's sagging and it's very apparent and it's not complex at all in that there's not like a lot of crevasses that I'm having to negotiate. I might only rope up one or two people, me and the person behind me, or me and two people behind me, but maybe the last couple people they remain spaced out, but they're not actually roped up. Certainly, when I'm skiing down glaciers, I prefer to take the rope off because it's not very fun to ski with the rope on. There's certain times that I have had to ski with the rope on where visibility is extremely poor, and that's super challenging and almost as dangerous as falling in a crevasse in some regards. Um, so yeah, there's times on a glacier that you're not roped up, and the reason obviously when you're going downhill is you're putting less weight overall on the snow except for your turns, but you're also moving much faster than you are on the way up. So your stress bubble is much less on the way down than it is up. And typically, a lot of times you're going down the same way that you went up. So you have a good perspective of where the crevasses are. And oftentimes I'll carry wands so I can mark those if they're difficult to see for the way down. But not being roped up is on a glacier is Russian roulette because you just don't know on a snow-covered glacier where there could be a crevasse for whatever reason. So it is a risk to not rope up, and it has to be a calculated one if you're going to choose to not rope up. I have never taken a rope off. Typically, when I'm on a glacier and I'm transitioning to steeper terrain, I change my rope technique and I go into a more like a shorter rope where I would actually start to pitch things out for a short distance until I got to a steeper part of the climb where we pitch things out much greater because as that terrain changes from a lower angle glacier to a steeper slope, we move from a falling into the mountain problem from a falling off the mountain problem. And so when I'm spaced out in normal crevasse travel, glacier travel for crevasse hazard, I wouldn't be able to stop a fall if my people behind me were that far back on a steeper slope. So I shorten the rope, probably put pieces of protection in between us or belay up to where we actually start the pitched climbing, but I wouldn't take the rope off to mitigate an avalanche hazard because of the crevasse hazard. I mean, if there was an avalanche, you could get pushed into a crevasse, and without the rope on, that's going to be extremely difficult to extricate anyone.
So we're dealing with really complex terrain in that regard. And so it really
Yes.
is And I think often your sort of primary hazard is maybe from, when I think about glacier travel, I'm often thinking about like fairly flat glacier travel, right? And so when you get into like steeper, where I might want to rope up because I'm worried about falling or needing to put in protection, I'm less worried about crevasses then and more worried about overhead hazard. And so
That's
some of
right.
it is about your travel technique in that.
That's right. And if
Um,
I'm that worried about overhead hazard, I would just back off. Come back another day.
today is not the day.
Exactly.
Here's kind of a follow-up question to that someone just asked. When folks who are climbing get buried in avalanches, is it more common that the belayer or second is buried than the leaders? And this, I think, maybe kind of speaks to what we were just talking about, Angela, which is like um, the burial is maybe what you're less worried about than the fact that when you're ice climbing, you're on a terrain trap, right? Like we talk about terrain traps being things like cliffs that you could be swept over and killed. And so burial is one issue, but also just being swept off the climb is potentially a bigger hazard for an ice climber, right?
Yeah. And I actually, I don't honestly know the statistics for that, but my inkling would be that a lot of the fatalities in avalanche related ice climbing accidents are trauma from the leader being totally knocked off of their feet and resulting in screws pulling or just a big fall. I honestly can't say about the burials. I don't know if more belayers are buried than the leader. um, yeah, I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I have
Good
to,
question.
I've had to I've edited, 2 volumes of the Snowy Torrents now, and so I've seen a lot of avalanche accidents, and I have I would say anecdotally, I can't think of an avalanche accident where the primary activity was ice climbing, where the person was actually buried. All of the accidents that I can think of that were ice climbing avalanche accidents were all someone being swept off and being killed by trauma because they were, swept off the cliff. But burial, because you're like necessarily in this vertical world, right? So there's like all this disbursement of the snow, and so the burial um, is less of an issue than the being swept off. But I will say that often if there is a belayer on the ground, that person is more likely to be buried, I would think, statistically, right? By just being at the base
Yeah,
of that climb where things can build up. You're again at the bottom of a terrain trap.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and these spindrift avalanches, they can knock you off your feet, and once you're on your feet, you can easily get buried. So they're no small deal.
Yeah, really high
Spindrift.
consequence. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Um,
that great shout out to the Snowy Torrents because that is a really important body of knowledge going back, and we can learn a lot from just studying some of those accidents that are in terrain similar to the types of terrain we like to recreate in.
yeah, I'm just gonna drop a link in the chat in case folks are interested in learning more about that publication. Um,
Accidents for North American Mountaineering, also from the American Alpine Club, is also a super great resource and learning from the
now it's
mistakes of
Accidents
others.
North American Climbing, Angela. We're old school, so we still call it mountaineering, but now it's climbing. Let's see. Whoops. I'll drop a link to that in as well. So in case folks want to find out a little more about that publication, you can call it either. And if you say mountaineering, people will know that you're in the know, like Angela and me.
That's right.
Let's see. And then I thought this is the last question that I see in the Q&A in the chat. Angela, let us in on the secret. Tell us about the screaming barfies.
I wondered if anyone would ask. That's the best question. A screaming barfie, I don't love them, but they're endearing,
I
I
was gonna
guess.
say nobody loves the screaming
Nobody
barfies.
loves the screaming barfies. I just love this t-shirt. It's when your hands get so cold. A lot of times when you're ice climbing, your hands are way up high because you're holding and gripping onto your tools, especially when we used to have leashes. and you lose a lot of circulation, and it's cold outside, and so all the blood starts flowing out of your hands, and by the time you're done with a pitch, your hands hurt so much that you start screaming, and then you just want to throw up. And I have actually, I've thrown up because it hurts so bad. And that's why I feel like I can wear this shirt, because I've actually barfed from the effect of
Wow.
like being so cold. And it's absolutely, and what hurts is not the cold, but it's when the circulation comes back, and just it's like your hands are on fire. So
Oh,
those are screaming barfies.
hard earned that t-shirt. You're tougher than me. Um,
Great
Awesome.
question.
Looks like these are all the questions that we have from folks. I'll give it just another minute in case people want to get one more quick question in, but um, let's see. Now we're just getting some thank yous from everybody. So we'll call it a night in that regard. And then I'm sure we'll have you back next season, Angela. So if folks want to learn more from Angela, you can hear from her in our webinar series. We also have last year's webinar that she recorded is on our YouTube channel. So you can check that out if you want to learn more from Angela. I always learn something whenever I come to one of your webinars. So really appreciate you being here, Angela. And folks,
Thanks,
thanks so
Emma.
much for attending. Like we said, we're really glad to see you here learning more about avalanches and how to avoid them. Oh, sorry, let me drop the YouTube channel link into the chat.
And thanks, everyone. I know everyone's super busy, and your time's very valuable, but keep up the education, and stay safe, and hope to see you in the hills.
Absolutely. Awesome. I just dropped that link in here, and I'll also we'll send out a follow-up email, and we'll include the recording to this in our follow-up email, and that will also get you to our YouTube channel. All right. Thanks so much, Angela. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.